Between the countless classes I've taught and one-on-one coaching I've done in the academic world, and the seminars, trainings, and workshops I've led in the sales world, I've literally taught more than 400 students. And today I'm going to teach you 5 little-known techniques I've used over those years to help students get into top universities, help salespeople achieve their financial goals, and which you can use to learn any skill faster. And the first of these techniques is the step-by-step Teachback. Now, you may or may not have heard of a method commonly referred to as the Feynman method, which put in simple terms is simply the practice of teaching what you learn. The step-by-step Teachback technique is similar to this idea, but it contains certain targeted elements that are even more effective than the Feynman method alone. Teaching others what you've learned has been shown in study after study, not only to reinforce what we learn, but also to help us identify gaps in our knowledge. The step-by-step Teachback technique, however, works like this. Whenever you practice what you've learned and have gotten a specific result, that could be anything from a wrong answer on a practice test to a poor outcome from a sales presentation, teach someone else what you learned from the experience, but do so in a very specific way. Instead of simply generically explaining what you did wrong and what you learned from the experience, break down your process into a series of steps. From your own perspective, what exact steps did you take that led to the result you got? For instance, whenever I've taught a test prep student and they got a multiple choice question wrong, I wouldn't simply go, "Oh, here's the right answer, be more careful next time." Instead, the first thing I would ask is, guide me through your reasoning as to why you thought this was the best answer. Tell me what steps you took to get there and in what order. At first, the student can't really answer this question. They aren't really aware of the steps they took. But after a few minutes of struggle, they start to piece together the steps they took in the process, and it forces them to become more conscious of their reasoning process, and more importantly, the tiny automatic behaviors they're engaging in that they aren't fully aware of. And using this technique can help you in the same way too. You see, we don't typically get the results we get simply because of our knowledge. If we have enough knowledge of the topic but are still getting poor results, it's most likely due to these small, unconscious habits. But teaching back the steps tends to bring those habits into our conscious awareness. If it's a multiple choice question, do you accidentally misread the question because you glanced at the answer choices first, which biased you? If it's a sales presentation, did you highlight the features of the product before you highlighted the benefits? And did you get right into the presentation first, or did you build rapport and ask questions to find the prospect's pain point first? Back when I was doing small group sales trainings on a weekly basis, these are some of the exact points we would teach back to each other, and we would determine the correct order of steps to take in a sales appointment based even on each individual product. And doing this had a tangible effect on our sales outcome. And that brings us to the second technique on our list, the segmentation technique. Often the reason we believe we can't understand some new information we're given is because of a phenomenon known as cognitive load. When we're presented with lots of information all at once, our brain often does not know what to focus on. So instead of comprehending the information, we panic and shut down. But what we need to realize is that not all information is relevant to our learning goal. In fact, often as much as 90% of the information given to us in a textbook, multiple choice question, or explanation is not actually necessary for us to learn that skill effectively. Often though, we do need to understand most of the information given to us. In both cases, then, our approach should be to break down the information given to us into smaller pieces, summarize or extract key ideas from each piece, and then make what I call a third grade conclusion from it. For instance, let's say you're reading a passage and are trying to get the main idea, but this passage is in pre-modern English and you don't even understand a lot of the vocabulary or sentence structures. Well, ultimately, you do want to learn the vocabulary, but in the meantime, you can cut the passage into 2 or 3 parts like we see here, identify repeated themes, and then summarize each part in the most general way you can. Don't overcomplicate it. Summarize simply. This is what I mean by a third grade summary. To simplify it even further, you can use what I call variable replacement, which so many of my students have found helpful. Here, for instance, we'll just cross out all of the words you might not know and replace them with variables or filler content so your brain doesn't get distracted by by them. This allows you to focus on the key themes that are repeated throughout the text that actually are important to your comprehension. Back in my small group sales trainings, we used to do the same thing. We would analyze a team member's presentation and give them feedback on how they could have explained it more simply. If they weren't understanding something, we would ask each other to summarize the main takeaways. And at the end of the day, learning concepts in this way helped us communicate more effectively to customers. The point here is simply to make it as simple for your brain to process as possible. Give your brain as little as possible to process at once, and over time, you'll get better and faster at processing larger and more complex pieces of information. Which leads us right into our third technique on this list, the pattern matching technique. Simply put, pay attention to finding structures and patterns and actually take a specific note dedicated to recording the pattern you found. So for instance, at some point in my teaching career, I realized students kept getting certain questions wrong and that it wasn't enough just to teach them all the rules and then expect them to get every question right. So I started to take another approach. For example, students often get this type of question wrong. But why? Because it has a specific structure that tends to fool them. And the structure is as follows: independent clause plus choice of punctuation plus ambiguous phrase, which could either be usually a modifier or another independent clause. And the same goes for this type of math problem. We notice it has a quadratic equation plus another equation containing a constant, and if we've seen this pattern enough times, we know we are going to use the discriminant to solve it. Taken to a sales context once again, we can notice, let's say, that if a potential client has a personality type on what's called the DISC quadrant that is more analytical, they will probably say one thing. And if they have a personality type on the DISC quadrant that is more dominant, they will probably say another. And as you can see, by identifying these patterns and structures that keep appearing consistently, things start to become more predictable. And when we notice these patterns and structures in our learning process, we absolutely need to write them down in our notes, review them, and then practice them again and again. As we note, review, and practice with these patterns and structures, we will get better and better results because over time, our brain will start to automatically notice the pattern, and a cue will be created for us in our brain that will almost automatically trigger the correct next step we need to take. In a way, you could say this is a method of training our intuition. And this is key because remember, learning isn't only about knowledge, it's about conditioning the right habits as well. And that brings us to technique number 4, the backpropagation technique. Now, I kind of stole this terminology from machine learning because I'm kind of obsessed with how machine learning works and it's super relevant to our own learning process. Have you ever gone out and done a professional presentation, tried to code something, done a problem set, or even practiced a specific play in a sport, and no matter how many times you try, you still keep getting the same poor results? Well, one of the reasons we find ourselves so frustrated in these situations is because it's so incredibly difficult to find out why we keep making these same mistakes. What's the true cause? I mean, there could be so many reasons, right? This backpropagation technique contains the solution for us. You see, when AI systems such as ChatGPT or autonomous robots learn something, they do so partially by measuring the results they got and then attempting to create a model of all the potential variables that could have contributed to that result. In this backpropagation process, they take the partial derivative of what's called the loss function, okay, just stay with me here, which measures how far the current result is from the desired one. And this process helps to isolate which of the many variables had the biggest impact on the outcome. Now, admittedly, it's kind of hard for us to do this ourselves, but we can engage in a form of it without having to do any fancy math. Let's again look at the example of test prep. College entrance exams are timed tests, and this complicates things a bit. For instance, if a student got a particular question wrong during a timed test, there are several potential reasons. One, they may have paced themselves poorly on this or other questions, which means they got it wrong due to issues with time management. 2, they got the question wrong because of a small habit, for instance, misreading the question. Or 3, they got it wrong because they legitimately lacked specific knowledge the question was asking about. So how do you determine which of these factors has the biggest impact? Well, one method I've used that has been particularly effective is to essentially run a mini experiment. I would have the student do some questions of the type they got wrong, time them, ask them for their answers and check them, and then give them a few extra minutes to go back and check to see if they would change any of those answers. If after using the extra time they got more answers right, then it's not likely to be a knowledge issue. Instead, it's likely to be a timing and pacing issue. But how can you do something like this for yourself? I suggest running these types of mini experiments. Depending on whether you're learning coding, a new language, a timed test, or a professional skill, the variables that could be playing a role in the outcome could vary wildly. You absolutely need to sit down and take some time to list out all the potential variables. Is it timing and pacing? How about specific knowledge or skill gaps? How about personality traits or vocal tone if it's a professional skill? How about intangible things like confidence or mindset? Ideally, get with someone who's a master in the field you're looking to master and have them help you make this list. Then proceed to run your experiment. For instance, if you're doing sales appointments and suspect that the issue is that you're having too many appointments with a certain type of prospect, let's say married men over 60 with a median income of 80K, you may want to try doing 30 days of appointments with only prospects outside that demographic, measure the results, and then run another experiment. Last but not least is learning collaboration. Okay, is this really a technique? Not exactly, but it's just as important as all those other techniques and hacks. Whenever I've started sessions with a student, whether that's one-to-one or in a larger seminar-style setting, my number one goal to help people learn effectively is to build a relationship with them. Based on past feedback from students, they have tended to see me as someone they were not only able to get results from, but also as someone they could rely on to motivate them, encourage them, and support them. And this is crucial in the learning process. The learning environment you're in should be relaxed, warm, and enjoyable. And if it's not, do your very best to seek out others who are learning the same or similar skills who you can trust, bond with, and also go through the hard times with. If it weren't for the supportive environment I always had in my direct sales business, I would not have gotten as far as I did in that business. If I hadn't had the support of great professors and mentors I had while publishing my book on value theory, I might not have become a peer-reviewed researcher in that field. The research on collaboration in the learning process is clear. Those who seek and receive feedback on a regular basis, form study groups and mastermind groups, and seek out mentorship have higher success rates than those who do not. So, all the techniques I've mentioned will give you tremendous results. But remember, learning is a lifelong process. We should never be alone in that process. So if you're finding my videos here for the first time, welcome to an amazing and growing community. And if you want to keep leveling up your critical thinking to make a massive impact in your own life and the lives of those around you, then be sure to watch this next video.